Hello, this is Coach Red Pill speaking to you live. I'm joined here by Tina Week and the Bronx Blogger, and we're going to be discussing the Enoch Powell Rivers of Blood speech that came out exactly 50 years ago this week. And it's quite a speech, and 50 years after it was delivered, it still raises people's hackles. And so we're going to be discussing that speech and principally the issue of how close are we to what Enoch Powell said in 1968. So before I get going, I just want to introduce both of my panelists. Tina Week, please, Tina, why don't you describe yourself?
Well, I'm a Finnish anti-immigration or nationalist is the word I like to use the most, nationalist activist, and I'm a vice city councilwoman over here in my hometown, Oulu, but my main work is on my blog and on YouTube, not in politics.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, great to know. Thank you, and thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, you have a very dynamic YouTube channel that's really growing, and you are sort of like a rising star in European nationalism. And on the other hand, we have here the Bronx Blogger. How's it going, Bronx?
Doing good, Coach.
Why don't you introduce yourself? That would be much easier.
Sure. So I am a anarcho-communist, anti-fascist, blogger, YouTuber. I've got some time in this conversation about immigration, and so I'm representing the opposition to Enoch Powell's speech and principles today.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself because I mute myself when you guys are speaking, and I keep forgetting. Anyway, before we get started, I just want to say that periodically, every 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, I'll just briefly interrupt when it's appropriate, just to give a voice to the super chats. And later on in this discussion, we'll check out the live chats insofar as any question, but the super chats will have priority, and I'll just break in really quick just to post them. Okay, so the background, for those of you who don't know, and I hope that most of you who are listening in know, Enoch Powell was at the time the conservative shadow minister of defense under who would later become the Prime Minister, Heath. And he gave a speech at a dinner in the Midlands in 1968, which became known as the Rivers of Blood speech. And he basically postulated that he outlined the conservative position at the time of immigration, and he went further and said that he believed that immigration would essentially displace the British people from their own islands. And he said that the allowing all of the Commonwealth nations, that is, the nations that had at one time conformed the British Empire, specifically India and Pakistan and those countries, that those people granting them automatic citizenship to the UK would result in a catastrophe. He said at the time that 50,000 immigrants a year at that time would inevitably lead to this foreign population overtaking the native national population of the British Isles. Now, this speech ultimately led to Enoch Powell being dismissed by Heath from his position, and after that, he never held a high office, though he continued as a Minister of Parliament for the Conservative Party up until 1974, I believe, and then he joined the Ulster Unionists from 74 to 87 when he finally retired, and he died a few years after. I actually forgot the date. I think he died in 98. Anyway, the point is, Enoch Powell, the reason that the speech is so important is that Enoch Powell was a heavyweight in British politics. It wasn't only that he was the shadow minister of defense at the time. He was a war hero. He was an extremely educated man. In his lifetime, he learned 14 languages and spoke them fluently. He was a big brain, and he was acknowledged to be a heavyweight in British politics. He is one of only two men who, during the Second World War, rose from being a corporal all the way to brigadier general. And that is an astonishing achievement. The man was brilliant. And that's why the speech had such an impact at the time. And we're going to talk about the impact of that. But before we get going, why don't we take the pro side of this? Tina, why don't you give us your appraisal of the speech, and what do you think of it?
Well, I think the demographics are basically speaking for themselves when it comes to whether Powell was right or not, because if this development continues that we have seen in the UK and elsewhere in Europe and also in the USA lately, that's how it's going to end up. And I'm not going to go too much into whether it's going to end up in a race war and bloodbath, or whether the white natives are simply going to fade away. I don't think either one is a good option, but the demographics aren't on our side.
Bronx, what do you think?
Well, I think I agree with Tina there on the whole. I think most people can say that the race war element of the Rivers of Blood speech was not only exaggerated, but it hasn't actually come to be. And I understand showmanship. Part of making a dramatic speech is using hyperbole. But there is that element in the Powell speech that within 20 years' time, which would have been 1988, which was during the notoriously right-wing Thatcher administration, that there was going to be some kind of race war where African immigrants were going to be enslaving white Britons. So I don't think that the most exaggerated and dramatic elements of what he says have come to pass. I think that people, when we're having this discussion, we need to consider why people are coming from third world to Western countries. A lot of it has to do with economics. A lot of it has to do with Western-backed dictators engaging in.
I'm sorry, Bronx, you're dropping out.
Oh, sorry. A lot of it has to do with Western-backed dictators like Assad, slaughtering their own people. So there are a lot of mitigating factors, but surely, the immigration and demographic pictures in these countries in the last 40 or 50 years has shifted.
Yeah, but hang on a second. For instance, the Nigerian wave torrent that is coming to Europe. Nigeria, they don't have any Western-backed dictator who's driving those people out. They're leaving out of economic necessity. So you can't say that, you can't lay it all on the footsteps of the West, that you're getting your druthers kind of thing. That would be unfair now, wouldn't it?
No, you're right. And what I mean is that different groups of immigrants. So if we're talking about the United States of America and Mexican immigrants, we're talking about economic problems created by the North American Free Trade Agreement, forcing farmers up into North America. But if we're talking about Syrian refugees, we're talking about a crisis created by a Western-backed dictator. So for each immigrant group, we need to take into account something more than somehow that they're coming with the intention to sort of demographically transform Western or culturally transform other countries.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's that they're consciously thinking that they're going to go to some other country and culturally transform it, but de facto that is what is happening.
Yes, because there is no need for malevolent intent for there to be terrible consequences. A wolf is only a wolf. It only needs to eat. But the results are just as terrible for the rabbit anyway.
Very well put. How do you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use such broad, metaphor.
Okay.
In terms of, again, we're talking about a predatory metaphor, so I wouldn't use that for migrants. These aren't. This isn't the army of Syria invading a European country. This isn't the army of Mexico invading the United States of America. I would say that your average migrant is much closer to a prey animal than a predator. And a lot of it has, again, it's very complicated why each group is coming to the West. And surely there can be discussions about outcomes and sovereignty, people controlling their borders and stuff like that. But my concerns with the Enoch Powell stuff is the idea that these groups are in some kind of a dominionist position where they are forming a power regime in the new country through breeding the native people out.
Yeah, but you said that you think the migrants are more of the prey than the predator. The prey of whom? Like
Well,
who's
they're no. My point is not that, for example, that Finland somehow is preying on these people. My point is that these people are coming from other countries because they've been victimized in some sense, either by economic inequality or by war or by starvation or something along those lines. So they're not coming in a predatory sense. That's my only point about the metaphor.
Okay, I understand, and I also realize that we share a lot of the same ideas. I also don't think that we should have any sort of intervention policy. All this bombing of the Middle East. I don't think, for example, colonialism in Africa ended up being that good of an idea in the long run for anyone. But apparently the conclusion we draw from this situation are pretty different.
That's fair. We're both. It's great that we're both anti-imperialists. That's good. But I don't think that either one of us represents the power structures in these Western countries, which have it's not even like it's not even like the European Union or the United States of America have stopped intervening in these countries and antagonizing and creating these forces that perpetuate these mass migrations, because these migrants are not coming here in a vacuum. They're coming here largely because they exist as subjects under international capitalist regimes.
Yes, but I don't think this influx of migrants would stop even if none of these Western policies had ever happened, because as long as there are people who are poorer than somebody else, there are people who are willing to migrate for a better standard of living, for a more comfortable life. And that's only natural. I'm not saying there's anything malevolent about it, but it doesn't make it any less destructive for us at the receiving end that all of these people are coming in. And it's not the fault of these people, but it's the fault of our leaders that they keep letting them in with all the destructive consequences we are facing in Europe right now. So as long as there are poor people, there are people who are willing to come here.
Yeah, but from what I've seen, for example, let's look at Europe in terms of the European Union as a force, and their military influences and their relationship with these big corporations that mine these third world countries for resources and exploit them, and again keep these dictators in place so they can continue deriving resources from these countries. If a lot of that stuff was stemmed and a lot of sovereignty was returned to these countries, the average person does not want to leave their continent and their culture. I guarantee you that a lot of these groups of people, if every country in North Africa didn't have, not every, but a lot of countries in North Africa, for example, have a lot of these similar conflicts, they would probably prefer to immigrate to a more similar nation than having to go all the way to Europe to find a job.
But Bronx, let me ask you the following question. I mean, do you think you're against dictatorships across the board, right? And you're against the dictatorships that are supported by the West, of course. I mean, you've said so just now. Now, what is the problem with a dictator? A dictator basically tells you, we're going to do this, and nobody has any kind of a voice. But supposedly the Western democracies do have a voice. The people have a voice. Now, don't you think it's unfair that the peoples of the Western democracies have had this sea change in their demographics, and they were never consulted on this decision? Don't you think that that's incredibly unfair insofar as the leadership of the Western democracies that allowed this to happen without any debate, without any consultation? Don't you think it is dictatorial, the way that this mass immigration has been forced on people?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I as an anarcho-communist, I believe in direct democracy. I don't believe in representative democracy. It creates too much of a vacuum between the last time you elected somebody and the next time you elect them. The direct democracy would have meant that there would have been referendums on what are we going to do about immigration and how many, what the numbers are, and do we want to stop now? So no, I'm not a big fan of representative democracy, because to me it's very close to a dictatorship, because you're not really consulted often enough to like affect policy. Now there is still some agency. It's not pure dictatorship. There is some agency, because every few years, if the population is unhappy with these immigration policy and these numbers, they can vote politicians in and out, and that's just the hard work of politicking. But no, yeah, I definitely endorse a direct. If there were referendums about immigration, I would definitely endorse that, because power to the people, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, because it doesn't seem very fair that Europe is sort of like slogging through the situation, and they didn't get a vote in it. The people of Europe, and also here's another thing that I find really, bothersome about the left, is that the left keeps saying that anybody who's opposed to mass immigration is a racist. But you yourself said that people want to participate in their own culture. They want to preserve their own culture. Their own culture meaning not just people who look like them, but also people who have the same inherent values and the same inherent outlook, right? And culture can be expressed in all kinds of different ways. It's not necessarily just a racial thing, right? But isn't it fair that people in the Western democracies, the common people, ordinary people, people like Tommy Robinson, the bête noire of the left, that they react against this mass immigration because it is encroaching on their own culture, just as Enoch Powell foretold? Isn't it reasonable for people to be upset about that?
I think that politicians can use all kinds of identities to mobilize people. I think that it can lapse into racism. I think that it can be like a Venn diagram kind of thing of like where people have these arguments.
No, hang on. Sorry, but I asked you a specific question. Isn't it fair or reasonable for the native populations of the Western democracies, if their leaders are not reflexive of their desires, that they themselves start protesting and working against this mass immigration that is overrunning their own culture that they didn't vote for? Isn't it reasonable?
Oh, sure, but I would put the addendum that they should probably, if they don't want to be accused of racism, they should be conscious of condemning any sort of hangers-on from xenophobic or racist groups. Like, if you're going to have an organization participate in politics and protest, you just make sure that you vet the people that are. You don't just accept. Oh well, this person agrees with me, in a wide sense.
So you are granting that the native populations of the Western democracies do have the right to protest against this mass migration and not be labeled de facto racists, right?
As long as they make clear that they denounce racists, as long as they don't allow racists to participate in their protest movements and to co-opt their narratives, then yeah, there shouldn't be a blanket accusation of racism. I believe in populism. I believe that people.
So say I'm a Welshman. I'm a Welshman up in Cardiff. I'm, for those of you who don't know, I'm not Welsh. I'm from South America, as a matter of fact. But suppose I'm a Welshman in Cardiff, and I see all of these Somalians, say, or Nigerians. Nigeria, I'm picking that because it is a relatively stable country and nobody's fleeing Nigeria out of political issues. They're fleeing it just for a better economic situation. So suppose I'm a native Welshman in Cardiff and I protest against all of these Nigerians who are in Cardiff. They are, as a matter of fact. Am I a racist? And who's to decide?
I mean, that's gonna be based upon what language you use, because politics is speech, and speech is about implications of language. I think,
what is it that makes one a racist? Does preferring your own culture make you a racist?
No. Not, we need to sort of delineate between culture and race. Culture is not the same as color. And I know that in Europe it's very different, meaning that in America, race is the end-all qualifier. Mm-hmm. We don't really have discussions about culture here. We have discussions about race. And I know that predominantly in Europe, you don't really have discussions about race very much. You more so have discussions about cultural compatibility. You know, people can make claims of xenophobia and stuff like that. It really depends on how you phrase what you say. So if you say, for example, you know, let's have a discussion about immigration, it's going to be perceived from the outside differently than someone saying, let's have a discussion about Somali migrants. It's the qualifier and the specificity of it that opens a door for people to make accusations that your criticisms are too narrow.
Yeah, but I would just like to ask you one question, which is why? Like, why us, for example, the Finns, who are a nation of 5 million people, we are ethnically very unique. We are not Scandinavian, Indo-European, or Slavic. We are an ethnic group on our own, even though there's so few of us. We had no part in colonialism. Actually, we were subject to colonialism by 2 different countries. Why on earth should we allow these sorts of migrants in when they are simply a negative effect on our society, negative effect on our economy, and most of all, they of course displace the Finnish population. So why?
Well, we're talking about people in crisis. We're not talking about people who've had an opportunity to adjust. They haven't had an opportunity to assimilate. I mean, you can't ask people to assimilate the second they walk off the plane, and you can't ask people in sort of a profound moment of crisis to immediately become productive members of society. There needs to be to some extent a grace period. And I've mentioned this before, is that, you know, most immigrant groups, and, you know, I come from New York City. I've lived here all my life. It's one of the most multicultural cities in the history of the Western world. And I've heard these arguments before of certain groups are not going to assimilate if we just let them. And eventually, these groups. I remember in the 90s there were complaints about Serbian and Albanian immigrants coming into where I live, right in the Bronx. And you know, after it's been about a little over 20 years since that war, I think. And the people in my city that are Albanian, they've blended in with the local people. You know, they see them at the local pizza shop. Everything goes fine. So I understand that people in crisis bring problems with them. That's the point. Is that if they're refugees, they're bringing problems to an extent, right?
Yeah, but by your very example, you're talking about these Albanians, and they have maintained their Albanian identity. By your very example.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, these Albanians are atypical in the immigration narrative because they are predominantly Muslim, you know, conservative people, Muslim, and white European, which is unusual in this conversation. But they have become. You don't have to completely surrender your identity in order to become a part of a society. You know, you become like a third thing where you become like this synthesis. You know, optimally, integration is you don't completely surrender your classical identity, but you allow enough of it to be assimilated into the existing culture.
Yeah, but what about the people who are there already, like the Finns? Why is it that they have to adapt to these foreigners?
Well, it depends. It depends on what you mean by adapt. I mean, I am not of the opinion that migrants are bringing sort of. I am not aware of any campaigns to establish Sharia law in Finland. So that, to me, that's asking Finns to adapt. If they're like, well, you should live under my religious law, and I would not endorse anyone coming from another country and saying to the people, again, I live in the United States of America. I don't believe in indigenous people being forced to live by some kind of rules that doesn't apply to them. I don't think that if people, for example, Muslim migrants want to integrate halal into their neighborhoods, it's fine. But if they go, well, you know, we have to pass a national law that everybody eats halal, I wouldn't endorse that.
Okay, hang on. Let me just cut in real quick about the super chats. Jane Ilatalo, I don't know how to pronounce that, sends €2. Tina with smiley faces, so lucky Tina. And let me see here. Johnny72187 sends $2. Thank you, Johnny. He says, base metaphor, she is absolutely right. I think it's the metaphor of the wolf and the bunny. And okay, so we've had Bronx Blogger on the hot seat a little bit. Now, Tina, let me turn to you a little bit. It's understandable. Mass migration is completely understandable, but does that mean that we should not have any kind of immigration? I mean, when is it that you draw the line? When do you think that immigration, for instance, in Finland, I think you would say it is perfectly reasonable if somebody from, say, just for the sake of argument, somebody from Uruguay emigrated to Finland for whatever reason, you wouldn't have a problem with that, right? And if this Uruguayan showed up in Finland and settled in Finland and bought a nice place in Helsinki and became a productive member of society, you would have absolutely no trouble whatsoever with that Uruguayan in this hypothetical. But
well, actually, I sort of would, because I'm an ethno-nationalist, and as I said, we are a people of 5 million. So I want that the Finnish people will populate Finland in the future too. We have a history going back thousands of years, all the way to the Stone Age, and I would like for it to continue. And I have no problem with, for example, guest workers, controlled immigration of people who are easily integrated, and that usually means Western people, because they share most of our values and culture. And I wouldn't throw all colored people out of this country, even if I had the power to do that, because I think there are a lot of people who have integrated enough that it would be unfair to kick them out. And then there are, of course, all the mixed breeds who basically have their choice of their identity. But I would be very careful with any immigration. If the Finnish population stays as the dominant majority, and if the Finnish values have a sort of hegemony over the country, then that's good enough for me.
I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you go
I'd
ahead.
like to. I spent a lot of time studying the subject of ethno-nationalism, and I think that maybe the paradigm is simpler in this situation. I know that in the United States of America, white ethno-nationalism is an extremely bizarre concept, because those people are not from this soil. In a situation like this, where the paradigm is much simpler, my concern is the idea that you gotta, what is it? The numbers is well over 90% ethnic Finnish in that country, and I just don't see, after all these centuries of maintaining such a major majority of that group there, any need for staunch ethno-nationalist policy to preserve. I just don't see some kind of menace racially or ethnically to that standard population. Like, is it, because maybe I need more information, Tina. The government that you have now, can you tell me what their politics are? Are they a left-leaning, center, right?
Well, I would say that they are. It depends on who you are asking. If you ask the nationalist side, they are the most multiculturalist leftist you can imagine. But if you ask the anti-racist side or the Antifa, they are hardline nationalists and right-wingers. So they are sort of a centrist government nobody's really pleased with. But I really disagree with what you said, that, okay, because Finns have existed so long that we should just take it for granted, because things have changed. Of course, we have existed in the earlier, because back then we have lived a pretty isolated life. We have had no national resources or wealth any outsiders from further away would want. So we have been simply building our country. But then in the 1990s, the borders were opened. And that's why the immigration problem in Finland is of a lesser extent than in most of Europe, because we opened the borders so late. And that's when the first Somalis and other third worlders started coming in. And now there are a couple of % of Muslim population in Finland. But if this current trend of immigration continues, it'll be between 10 and 15% in 2050. So now, more than ever, we desperately need this nationalist policy, because now we are facing the threat. We didn't face it in the 1960s when the borders were closed and when we lived a pretty isolated life here in Finland, but now we really do need it.
Okay, but so I'm learning also because I'm not from your country. Can you tell me some of the circumstances around this first opening of the borders in the 1990s? Who the political parties in charge were and what the explanation was?
Well, most of it was due to the Soviet Union collapsing, because in the Soviet Union there were a lot of Somalis living in there who had lived in there for several years. They speak Russian, and they went running from any danger. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and it became easier to travel to Europe, a lot of Somalis decided that they want to move to Finland instead because of the higher standard of living. That's also when the multiculturalism and anti-racism really started to take a foothold among our elected officials and other government officials. So that's when it all started, in the late 1980s to early 1990s, with the Soviet Union collapsing.
Can you tell me what political parties were predominant at that time in your country? Were they left-leaning, centrist? Were they capitalist, socialist?
I think the president was from the centrist party, and there were social democrats also in power then. But yeah, I would say left-leaning because of the social democrats.
Can you tell me how these Somali migrants affected the labor were these migrants subject to the same labor rights as other workers, or could they be used by powerful capitalists to undermine the mainstream labor market? You know where I'm going?
No, the unions have a very strong position in Finland, so you cannot just hire people under any conditions, and all people who are in Finland, the same conditions apply to everyone, so there's no possibility to use foreigners as a cheap labor. And also the Somalis, they are the most unemployed group of immigrants in Finland, and I think their economic, I don't know what's the word. Well, there are.
Tina, quick question: do the Somalis who are unemployed, do they receive, whether they're citizens or not, whether they're legally immigrants or illegally immigrants, do they receive benefits from the state?
Yes, they do, because if you're on Finnish soil, you are entitled to basic welfare, which means the stuff you need to stay alive. So money for food, basic healthcare, things like that, even if you're in the country illegally. And if you are here illegally legally, then you, of course, are entitled to a lot more benefits. And for example, to the Somalis, the child benefits families get for every child they bring to the world are a big deal, because the Finnish families usually have like 2 children, so they don't get a lot of child benefit for them. But the Somali family can have 10 to 15 children, so they can earn a doctor's wage every month in just child benefit.
Okay, so
I mean, that seems incredibly unfair. I mean, Bronx, you gotta give her that it seems incredibly unfair that lazy ass immigrants who for whatever reason don't want to be employed are there and sucking on the public tit. It is unfair, don't you agree?
I'm familiar with this narrative of de facto parasitism of immigrants. I mentioned before, these people are in crisis. A lot of them don't have much of the native language because they did not immigrate in a conventional sense where you can prepare yourself culturally, you can educate yourself on the language, and you've got a job waiting for you when you get there. So I think that these circumstances are complicated by this crisis circumstance. So the people that are coming there, again, since they're first generation and they came under unexpected circumstances, they're more likely to end up needing assistance. But I don't think that the majority of people who come to these countries have some kind of sentiment of I don't want to work. That's a very unusual sentiment amongst people, especially in the third world, where where these, those are often traditional values to work for what you get.
But I have to say that these are not people running from any crisis that I know of. These first Somalis that got into Finland, they were studying in the Soviet Union or working in there, and they were invited there by the Soviet Union government. So they were the intellectual elite of Somalia. And they had lived in Soviet Union for years. They spoke Russian and everything. Their children spoke Russian. So there was no crisis they were running away from.
Would they have more difficulty finding employment in your country than a born citizen would?
Of course they would, because they don't speak Finnish or have much skills that are needed in our labor market. But that applies to all immigrants, but not all immigrants do as poorly as Somalis. For example, German immigrants do actually better on the work market than Finnish people do. And East Asian people do very well too. But to every Somali that is working, there are 9.7 Somalis who are dependents.
Okay, so you pointed out that the Somalis are going to have they're going to have a harder time getting work. So I've always mentioned in these discussions.
She didn't say that they were going to have a harder time. She says that they're not.
She acknowledged that they would have a harder time than natives, but that they seem to be more unemployed than other immigrant groups. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I think that would be the case. Yeah.
Okay, so again, I've being a leftist, I've had many discussions about social welfare, and is it possible that someone somewhere, an immigrant, is willfully exploiting welfare? Yes, of course, someone somewhere is exploiting welfare because
someone somewhere. Your point painting it as if it was like a 1 in a million, a needle.
I'm sure that there exists some number of Somalis that are exploiting social welfare in this situation. I'm sure that's just a human thing that has to exist, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't endorse the narrative that there are not other mitigating factors involved in the unemployment of a massive number.
Well, okay, let's grant that there were other factors. Okay, now these Somalis, for instance, in Finland, they can perfectly well go back to Somalia. They know Russian. They could go to Russia today. Why is it that Finland, that had nothing to do with encouraging these people to go to Russia, that is not inhibiting them from going back to Somalia? Why is Finland having to pay the tab on this particular party?
Well, that leads me back, Tina, to the question of the people that brought this group in, allowed this group to enter into your country. Are they still in political power now?
Yes, they are. Actually, our prime minister is from the centrist party, and the Social Democrats, I think they are they the second biggest or the biggest opposition party right now?
Okay, so you've had this regime, but they are not imposed. This is representative democracy, right? That you have in your country. So do they represent the mainstream Finland position, meaning like the average person on the street in Finland supports this party?
Oh, well, that of course would depend on who you ask, because the leftist opinion on that might be very different from mine. But I would say no, that they are not really pleasing anyone, and the voter turnouts are pretty low, especially in the municipal elections. So people aren't that pleased with the situation, whether they are on the left or on the right. And for example, when it comes to illegal immigrants, that's a good example of it. Over 80% of Finns want illegals immediately deported, but still our government is unable to do anything because they are paralyzed by law, by saying that, okay, there are EU contracts that demand us to keep these people here. Okay, our constitution says we cannot deport these people. Okay, there's this and that. So they always have excuses ready. But I would say no, they don't have the majority opinion on their side, because both the right-wingers and the leftists are very unsatisfied with them.
Okay, does your country have sovereignty in terms of the EU cannot control your immigration policy? Do you have a concrete control of your policy?
No, of course we don't, because we are an EU country, and as long as you're in the EU, you have to do what the Brussels tells you. So even though in our constitution it says that the rule makers of Finland are the Finnish people, when we joined the EU in the 1995, then everything changed, and whenever stricter immigration policy is demanded, our leaders say that they cannot do it because there are these EU contracts, there are these UN resolutions and everything. So no, we are not sovereign in that sense anymore because we are in the EU.
Okay, so when you entered the EU, how democratic was that decision? Was it held up as a referendum for the people, or was it just kind of like a backdoor? When I say power elites deciding for you to join the European Union?
There was a referendum, but it was, as I said, in 1995. I was 10 years old when that happened, so I had no say in that decision. And even the prime minister of that time has admitted that, okay, there was some misinformation spread about the EU, and there are people in the media who have admitted that they were a part of this misinformation campaign pro-EU. So people didn't really know what they were signing up for, because we were told that, okay, if you join the EU, we get all these wonderful economic benefits. It'll be so good for our exports and everything. But there was nothing said about, okay, you are also giving up your sovereignty to Brussels, who don't have your interest at heart. And I must say that what you said about direct democracy, I also strongly agree about that. I don't believe in representative democracy either, because of things exactly like this. People don't know what people are lied to. They are, and they cannot decide for every matter separately. So mistakes are easily made, and people easily get results they are not happy with. So I have to say I agree with you about that.
Sorry, Coach. You want to step in?
No, yeah. I just want to say it's actually great that we're ending or not ending, but closing that chapter on a positive note of agreement between you two. But I just wanted to pivot back a little bit to the Enoch Powell speech. As you might have known, there's been a bit of a kerfuffle today because Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's the front runner to be the Conservative Party leader and possibly the next Prime Minister of Great Britain, he was asked about the Enoch Powell speech, the Rivers of Blood speech, and he essentially said that he thought that his father's reply was the reply that he would fully endorse. And his father was an editor at the Times back in 1968, and he wrote the editorial that called the speech an evil speech. In fact, that was the title of the editorial. I wanted to pivot back a little bit to the Enoch Powell speech, because I wanted to ask you both, why do you think it is considered an evil speech? Because if you read the speech, and I think that both of you can agree with it, perhaps Enoch's timeline as to when the immigration would become overwhelming, would overwhelm Great Britain, perhaps the timing of it wasn't 15, 20 years, but it is in sight at this point. London, as you might know, probably everybody knows at this point, London is today a minority native British citizen city, a city that rather has a minority native Britons living in it. This is Greater London, of course. And demographically speaking, it is inevitable that London will be a minority and predominantly Muslim country, because the Muslim population is the one that's growing quickest in London. And so that's demographically, it's in the post. So I want to ask you, why do you think it is that people consider the speech evil when he was simply laying out the future? Do you think that is justified to call it an evil speech, or do you think it wasn't an evil speech? I'll start with you, Tina. What do you think?
I think it was mainly about basically shaking the boat, or people want to be comfortable and they want to believe that nothing bad will ever happen. And back then, it was still somehow possible to believe that, okay, maybe all this will work out. Maybe we will have the wonderful rainbow nations and equality and all that. And then when someone comes along and tells you, okay, that's not going to happen, and I see that this is going to end up badly, so then of course people are going to hate that. And it's not just that they are being told that these evil or terrible things are coming, but that when somebody speaks out, it sort of breaks the silence, and the rest of the people then have to choose a side too. They have to choose whether they are going to act on it, whether they are going to try to prevent all these problems that are looming, or whether they are going to just pretend as if nothing is going on and stay silent about it. So of course it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers to make a speech like that, especially in the time like that.
Bronx, do you think it was an evil speech? I mean, I see Tina's point, which is that she was that he was rocking the boat. Do you think it was that, or do you think it was truly an evil speech?
I don't use the word evil when talking about politics. I don't think it's constructive, but I will use the term destructive. I will say the speech is destructive in the capacity that it is not a particularly utilitarian argument about these things. He's not making a utilitarian argument. He's making a moralist, sort of alarmist argument, in my opinion. Obviously the race war element, I think, is what people.
Wait, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to cut in. What do you mean by he's not making a utilitarian argument? What do you mean by that phrase?
If the man had made a technocratic, dispassionate argument about numbers, I think people would not have disavowed it so staunchly as using the word evil. I think that the section that involves the black man wielding a whip over the white man and blood being shed and sort of using the race war metaphor is what sort of put him in hot water. Now, no matter what language he used, I wouldn't agree with his position, but I'm just trying to explain why people, including myself, have such a visceral reaction is because he uses a lot of these visual metaphors about the black hand and the whip and the blood and the river and stuff like that. I think that most people are going to get turned off by that because the implication is that he's stoking racial violence or implying that racial violence is coming.
Yeah, but I have to make a couple of corrections here. That first of all, the timeline mentioned in the speech, the 15-20 years, it wasn't Powell's words. He was simply quoting someone else when saying that. So we cannot really put that timeline on him. And second of all, the entire rivers of blood, that's a metaphor. So I don't really think that's talking about race war per se, and we have seen the bloodshed already with immigration, and it doesn't take a race war to create that bloodshed. We have had terrorism, we have this street crime. For example, in Britain, there's a machete attack or a sword attack every 90 minutes, acid attacks, terrorism, all these terrible phenomena that wouldn't be there if there wasn't this massive immigration problem. So the rivers of blood are already there, even if there's no race war.
I mean, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, George. So I'm not gonna necessarily endorse that there are rivers of blood in Europe. I think that crime happens. I think that migrants usually land in poverty situations. That's what happens when you are a migrant, and especially if you're a refugee, you usually start off from a position of poverty. You may have come from your country in a position of poverty. Being a person myself who was born into poverty, and the poorest congressional district in my country, I've seen how being poor and being disadvantaged and being sort of makes people engage in maladaptive behavior. I don't believe that if Europe had been isolationist this whole time, that everything would be so staunchly different that crime wouldn't exist.
I'm not saying that crime wouldn't exist. I'm saying these specific problems wouldn't exist.
So I mean, when you say specific problems,
Yes, like
that's
Islamic terrorism, for example. Oh, look at Malmö, Sweden. It's difficult to even try to use the poverty card when it comes to Sweden because Sweden is the #1 welfare state. Foreigners are offered every comfort there is, and still they are topping the charts, for example, in immigrant crime. And they didn't have to file statistics on grenade attacks or gang rapes before this immigration, but now they do. And now they have these horrible crimes. And poverty isn't leading white Swedish guys to gang rape Swedish girls and set their genitals on fire with a lighter fluid. And they are not leading the white Swedish guys to shoot up the homes of police officers or throw hand grenades at police stations. So why is it these people who tend to do it if they are poor in the #1 welfare state of the world, where nobody's starving?
okay. But are you saying that Finnish people are not capable if their circumstances got to some kind of point that this? I don't understand. You're saying that there's some kind of degeneracy that Finnish people are genetically not capable of, or?
Of course, people are capable of all sorts of things, but what comes to them naturally is completely different thing because different peoples have different temperaments.
I think also is the issue of culture, because it is a culture. I mean, think of the Swedish situation. Native Swedes have been socialized over God knows how many generations at this point to not only hold equality as the #1 virtue, but also to respect women and a whole host of things that we generally in the West think is good. And their culture has inculcated these behaviors over generations. And these migrants do not have that culture. I mean, here you have the cultural issue that you've mentioned several times. Well, here you have a culture that is just not adapting, willingly not adapting, and in point of fact, bringing their own culture, which is exceedingly negative. Because a lot of these cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, where women are treated as chattel, sometimes subhuman, is really despicable. Some of the behaviors towards women. Well, it's clashing with the Swedish culture, and the Swedes are getting the worst of it. Now, this isn't a racial thing. I don't think that anybody's arguing that these.
Oh no. Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to give the impression that I'm lobbying the term racism around. That's not my point.
Mm-hmm.
I need a little more info. Tina, is your country predominantly secular? Is that a long-standing tradition in your country, or is it broadly Christian? Or
Well, that's sort of a debatable issue. Most of the people in Finland are members in the same church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, but they are sort of cafeteria Christians, most of them, that they are members in the church, but they are not actively religious.
Oh, sorry to butt in. There's a super chat that's really good. For Posterity sends $5 Canadian. Thank you for Posterity. He says, a question for Bronx. Why is it wrong for nations like England, Germany, Japan to preserve their ethnicities and cultures? Why destroy diversity? Fair point.
oh no. I mean, the implication again that I'm not for the position that somehow Japanese people need to surrender their culture to anyone who comes there. I'm not for the position that British people need to themselves convert to Islam to appease an incoming minority. I'm only of the position of tolerance and acceptance of people who choose to maintain in a peaceful and constructive way the religion and values that they've lived with. But I don't believe in some kind of imposition, and I don't believe that Japanese people, for example, should no longer be allowed to engage in Shinto, or that British people should somehow unsubscribe from the Anglican Church.
But so you see how a lot of people in the Western democracies can feel as if they are being discriminated against in favor of these minority populations, these immigrant populations, and that it seems as if the elites, cultural and political, are giving priority to these immigrants and looking down at the native populations. Don't you see?
What do you mean in terms of priority?
Well, because see, the priority of any nation's government should be the people of that nation, not some immigrants. Immigrants are a luxury, don't you think?
Okay, but you're saying they're being prioritized.
They are.
To me, there's a difference between giving social welfare to somebody who just showed up today as a migrant.
Right.
And for example, there's been brutal austerity in Britain. I'm sure you've been tuned into this. I obviously don't agree with that. I think that it's bad optics that the Tories just finished a massive between like 2010.
What's the point you're trying to make?
My point is that it's bad optics for a country to slash its social welfare to bits and then import a bunch of migrants and give those people social welfare easily. I feel like a lot of people are drawing conclusions, and I think that their gripes are with sort of this brutal capitalism rather than the people that are receiving benefits.
Okay, capitalism bad, we get it. But the fact is that the native population social welfare stuff that they've paid in, over the years, the decades, themselves, their parents, what have you, they're getting slashed, so they're not eligible for these benefits. And yet these immigrants, illegal immigrants, do get these benefits. And if you try to throw out the illegal immigrants, you're a racist. I mean, isn't that contradictory, and isn't that unfair to the native population?
Well, are we talking about migrants or illegal refugees? Are not illegal aliens. Excuse me, illegal. They're not illegal immigrants. They're the government brings in migrants and refugees. Are we talking about?
Isn't it unfair that people who are illegal? Let's talk about illegal immigrants then. Why is it that they are getting benefits and the native populations are not? Because this is a fact. A lot of them are getting.
Okay, I can speak particularly to my country and my city. Okay, we obviously have a lot of Central and South American immigrants in New York City. A lot of them are coming here and they do off-the-books work in construction or restaurants, etc. And I'll give you a scenario: if one of these immigrants who is law-abiding, right? They haven't done anything while they're here. Ends up in an emergency room situation. Is it better to let the hospital absorb that cost, or to let Medicaid pick up the bill? Because what are we going to do? Turn people away from emergency rooms?
For example, okay, go on.
No, Tina, you go ahead, please.
That, for example, here in Finland, we have a pretty good public healthcare system for everyone, but it's still unfair to the native population because, for example, in the city of Helsinki, they just passed a bill that made it that gave illegal immigrants certain healthcare and social services rights, and that has caused that there are some healthcare services the Finnish people have to pay for. They have to pay, for example, a health center fee every year if they want to go see a doctor at the public healthcare center. But because the illegals have no income, they are basically exempt from that. So these illegals who came into the country without any papers, who are staying here even though they have been told to leave, are getting better benefits than the Finnish people who are born here, whose grandparents have been buried in the soil and who pay taxes. So of course that feels unfair, and it's not capitalism because Finland is a very left-wing country. We don't have a libertarian right or economical right in our politics. Everybody is left-wing here, even the so-called right-wing parties when it comes to economics. So you cannot blame the capitalism on it because in the end, at some point, the money runs out. There isn't enough money to pay for nice things for everyone. So you have to prioritize. And unfortunately, these green and red parties who are in charge of Helsinki, decided that they will prioritize the illegals before the Finnish natives.
Okay, so for example, there are usually two different strains of social welfare. There are means-tested social welfare, and then there's universal social welfare. I endorse universal social welfare. I believe that the native people should not be paying into, for example, those fees you were talking about. But also, I'm of the opinion that if someone is already in your country, that what can you do? It's a compassion scenario, right? Like this person is already in the country, and if you have, because again, I don't believe in mean testing. I agree with you. I do not believe in means testing social programs because it creates this stratification you're talking about, where one group will eventually become privileged over the other under the implication that one group is too wealthy for benefits or too well off to need assistance. So I don't endorse that. But I also am of the opinion that if someone's already in your country, what's the solution if they need this desperate medical care?
We are not talking about desperate medical care. We are not talking about first aid, because that sort of things are guaranteed for everyone on Finnish soil, whether you are a refugee, whether you are a Finnish citizen, whether you are a tourist. If you need medical aid to save your life, or if you get a broken leg or anything that needs first aid, you are giving it. We are not talking about that. We are talking about long-term treatments, dental care, even cash money in the hand for migrants, because they don't have bank accounts, these illegals. And but these people, they do have a choice. They could go back to their own countries, because these are mostly people who have been through the asylum process several times. So they have come to the country, for example, in 2015, when a lot of these Iraqi migrants showed up in Finland, and they have applied for an asylum. They were rejected. Then they have complained about that decision to the courts. Then they were rejected too. Then they might have applied another asylum application, get rejected again. And some people have 4 or 5 rejected asylum applications that have been confirmed by Finnish courts. And for these people, the Finnish government has the so-called supported deportation. So if they leave out of their own free will, they get a certain amount of money to go with them, which is over a year's pay in Afghanistan. So these people from Afghanistan and Iraq, which are the biggest groups in the asylum seekers of Finland, they would do very well if they just took that option. But they are not taking that option. So it's not inevitable for these people to be in this country. And of course, to even get to that position that we have to talk about healthcare for these people, how will we deport these people, we have to ask, how did they end up here? We are at the very top of the Northern Europe. We are the last country for these people to arrive. So for an Iraqi person to arrive here, or an Afghan to arrive here, he must have gone through at least 6 or 7 safe countries like Germany, Austria, Denmark, and Sweden. And even those countries weren't good enough for them. For some reason, they kept going and came to Finland instead. So I think that alone tells that these people are not in crisis or anything. They are asylum seekers who are looking for the best deal. And that's why they keep crossing these safe countries and come all the way over here in the north to Finland.
Okay, so you if someone goes through the asylum process and gets approved by your government, you're fine with them participating in the social contract, right? Like your reservation here is that these people were processed and rejected and they're still hanging around.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the asylum system in general, because it tends to sort of prioritize the worst people and the less needy, because those people who are in most need of refuge, they usually are unable to come here all the way to Finland. They are somewhere in the refugee camps in Syria, or somewhere in Middle Asia, or Sudan, places like that. They are people who have no resources to travel to Europe. But the guys who we get here are these 20-something Iraqi guys with their very well-chosen clothing and their iPhones and everything, who take selfies when they are being deported from the country. So I can tell that, okay, these are not the most needy people in the world. I can imagine of more needy people. So I'm not a big fan of the asylum system. And don't take me for being cold-hearted, because I really want genuinely all people in this world to do well and be happy and have a possibility to have a safe and prosperous life. But I just don't believe that they should all have it over here in Finland or here in Europe.
Okay, but I'm trying to make a distinction, right? Meaning, like, I understand a reservation about illegal immigrants participating in social programs. I understand that. I understand that can be there's an upward limit on compassion where it becomes more than, like you said, first aid is something, right, which is needed, but luxury welfare is probably a step too far. Particularly, what really sort of catches for me here is that they would exclude the native people who are financially participating in putting money into the system, into the tax system, that they would. I don't think that's necessarily fair, but if someone legally is approved as an asylum seeker, and I'd like to see statistics on sort of the age thing, because of course I would approve. I would agree with vetting, right? Like if the premise of the asylum system, and that's probably a good question for me to ask you, what are the parameters? Are there legal standards about age inside your asylum system?
No, they are not. Those who are underage usually tend to get at least temporary asylum for some time, because we cannot easily prove, or our officials cannot easily prove, that they will have somebody to take care of them when they get back to their own country. But generally, it doesn't matter. It's only about whether you are actually being persecuted or not. So it's about the UN definition for asylum, that if you are under personal persecution and cannot escape inside your own country, then you are granted an asylum regardless of your age.
Okay, so you approve of children receiving asylum?
Well, it depends on the case. As I said, I'm not big on this asylum system in general, because it imports usually the less needing people, and it has become also a way of, or this a doorway to illegal immigration, and it has faced a lot of abuse, like these 30-something guys pretending that they are underage, and so it's a system very prone to abuse. So I don't like that system very much. I believe that the asylum system should be upheld in the way it was originally meant, because you can tell by the text alone that the asylum system, when UN actually came up with it, it was meant for people who are actually fleeing from personal persecution, like political activists who are facing persecution from the government. It was never meant for these mass migrations that we are facing now. But in the original sense, I sincerely believe it. Because, for example, we have this one Indian man who lives over here in Finland as an asylum seeker. And he has faced persecution because of his religious beliefs. He's an atheist who has criticized the Hindu gurus and the Catholic Church with the fake miracles in India. So he's in danger in there. So I can understand that we give an asylum to a guy like him, because he's actually facing personal persecution. But if it comes to be a doorway to 30,000 Iraqis to walk into our small country during 1 year and claim that they are all being personally persecuted, then no, it's not working. The system is too destructive for us. And I believe in compassion, as you said, but there are limits to compassion too. For example, because here in Finland, people often say that it's because of the human rights that we must offer the due process to every asylum seeker. And that's why several people are actually dead over here in Finland. For example, in the Turku terrorist attack, I don't know if you have heard of it. Is it familiar to you?
Let me get some details. It sounds vaguely familiar, but there's a lot of stuff going on in Europe right now.
Yes, and last summer, an asylum seeker stabbed several Finnish people, killing 2 women and wounding, I think it was 7 women. And he specifically targeted white women in that attack. And he was an asylum seeker from Morocco who had claimed to be underage. First of all, he was put into a Finnish, I don't know what is it, the school after elementary school, junior high, because he simply claimed to be underage. So they said, okay, let's put this guy in junior high. And then when he got bored, he decided that, okay, I'll go cutting off some Finnish women's heads. And now, because of our compassion, because we were unable to put limits and say, okay, you are from Morocco, that's a tourist destination. Finnish people go there for vacations. You are not supposed to be here. You have no business being an asylum seeker. And that guy should have been turned back at the border. Still, we let him in, and because of human rights, we gave him the due process, and now 2 people are dead because of it. And there was also one case of an underage Iraqi migrant killing and robbing a Finnish man in Kajaani. And there are several crimes that these people have committed. And for example, in aggravated assault, aggravated rape, aggravated robbery, all these crime type, or in all of these crime types, asylum seekers are highly overrepresented. So yes, we should place tight limits to our compassion, because not too much compassion leads to bloodshed.
Bronx, I wanted to ask you something that's been brought up in the chat, and it's something that I had, and T. Fitchy says it best here, says, does Bronx Blogger support asylum for white South Africans persecuted for their race? As some of you may know, or most of you know, that in South Africa, the white population is less than 9%, I believe. And they are being persecuted, openly persecuted by the government, as a matter of fact. So openly, but not officially. It's sort of like under the radar. Now, do you think that those people should be granted asylum, Bronx? Because, spoiler alert, the European Union is not granting any of those white South Africans any kind of asylum in Europe. And very explicitly so. Do you think that that's fair?
Okay, so here are the details that I'm aware of. Their own country, I think, is they're trying to get back to they're Dutch, right?
They're Dutch.
These are Dutch Afrikaners. Okay,
yeah.
So they're trying to get back to their home countries, and they're not being welcomed back specifically there. I, of course, endorse bringing any people in this deep situation of crisis, because I understand those people are experiencing extreme financial hardship. There's brutal drought conditions on those farms, and it's become extremely difficult for people to live there. I of course, endorse compassionate, asylum. Status for those people, but I would not accept it from people who then go, well, this is we need exclusively immigrants like this, and we should make special accommodations for these immigrants because they are white or because they're Christian or any of that stuff. I think that they should be brought in under existing asylum programs and treated equally to other like war refugees. They should be allowed to participate. I mean, this is this weird myth that I hate. Real quick, there's this weird myth that I hate white Europeans. My mom's a white European, so like I'm not really sure where that has bubbled up from, and like this idea that somehow I don't have compassion for white South Africans, which that's not. I've always put a disclaimer whenever I talk about how the narrative around that situation is playing out. I always put the qualifier. I understand that this is a terrifying situation. These people deserve compassion and they need help. But there are people who will use that situation for politics.
Yeah, but do you agree that that it seems that the European Union favors the brown-skinned people over the white-skinned people?
I think that just in terms of numbers, if you're structuring a refugee program, you're going to get more brown people than you are going to get
No,
white people.
yeah, but I mean, the fact that the Europeans say no to all Afrikaners, right? But yes to Somalians and Nigerians and all of these other people from these countries that don't have the problems, not even close to the problems that are happening right now in South Africa. Don't you think that
those Afrikaners own land?
White. Well, yeah, you can own land, but if it's constantly burned and your farmhouse is constantly attacked, and the people in your family are raped and sometimes murdered in the most gruesome of fashions, well, yeah, you can own it, but it means nothing.
I don't think the white
power
European
to destroy but forget about that issue. It doesn't matter if they own the land or not. And there
no. I'm answering what you were asking me.
Well, okay.
I don't believe that the Tories in Britain are exhibiting anti-white bias against South Afrikaners. I don't think that it's an anti-white problem.
You don't think that the European...
I don't think the European Union has an anti-white bias. Think about the mechanics of that. I mean, the governing bodies of every European country is majority white.
These white immigrants from South Africa, they're not letting them in.
I know. I only know of Holland. I only know of Holland turning them away. I don't know if they've applied to Britain. And I know that Australia is very receptive to receiving them and may actually receive them this year. So I don't think
Australia and Georgia, oddly enough. Well, Georgia has very specific reasons for that.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think it's an anti-white thing. I do believe that.
No, do you think that the European Union has an anti-white bias? Because they're not letting in these Afrikaners, but they are letting in all of these other people from these other countries that have far less problems and far less persecution than the white Afrikaners.
But if you're going to say anti-white bias, then you have to think about all the people that emigrated to Western Europe when the Soviet bloc collapsed.
So it seems to me here that you just don't want to admit it, because they're not letting in any Afrikaner strictly because they're whites. They're white Afrikaner, and they're saying you can't come in. Where has anyone made any sort of statement that the reason they are not accepting them is because they're white? Okay, okay, you're right. But then again, that by the same token, because you always on the left, they always talk about systemic racism, that it's invisible, that people are racist unawares. So we can apply the same logic and say, okay, the European Union, racist unawares, is not allowing any white in because they're white.
Okay, but that's ahistorical, because after the collapse of Yugoslavia, they let plenty of white immigrants move within the existing European Union. How could the same people now suddenly have an anti-white bias when they were fine with letting ex-Soviets and people from collapsed Eastern Bloc countries, the same European Union, didn't discriminate against those white people?
They were Muslim, weren't they?
No, Serbs are Catholic, man. They let plenty of Serbs from Yugoslavia come into Western Europe. The European Union, that was 20
years ago. That was 20 years ago. Now they're not letting in any whites, but they're letting in as many Africans or Middle Easterners as they could want.
Okay, but I need to see
that an inherent racist bias.
I need to see some kind of data, like how many of those Afrikaners applied for asylum, how many of them were turned away, which countries they applied to. I mean, again,
Holland, Belgium, because a lot of them are in South Africa come from the Congo, from the Belgian Congo, and are ethnically Belgian, if you want to put it that way. France, because of the same thing, a lot of them are French descent, and England, and they are not being granted asylum, and they are clearly being persecuted. Isn't that racial bias, racism applied towards whites by the Europeans, by the European authorities?
I think Bronx Blogger is having some connection issues or something. He dropped from the Hangout.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
At least, well, now he's back.
There we are.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
I think-
my Wi-Fi signal misbehaved. Could you pick up from
No,
where you
man,
were?
I thought that you hung up on me, man.
Oh no, absolutely not. No. Yeah, I've been in so many debates, discussions about this stuff. I never do that. My
No,
Wi-Fi signal misbehaved. Continue from where you were.
No problems. Yeah, the point, just to recap, the point that I was trying to make was that, see, today, you were talking about Serbia, but that was in the 90s. Today, in 2018, the current year, these white Afrikaners who are a descendant of different countries, predominantly Dutch and British, but also French and Belgian, and toss in some German in there too. They have applied, and it is a fact. I do not know the specific numbers, but I would gather in the thousands. They have applied for asylum to the European nations, and they have all been denied asylum. Okay.
Okay, but
so can you?
I need to know specifically why they were turned away. What the parameters of the programs they were turned away from? Did they fail some kind of threshold economically? Did they fail some kind of threshold?
It doesn't matter. The issue becomes: can't you then say that they are basically the victims of racism, of inherent racism? Inherent racism is used all the time. So
okay,
against
but
white people are inherently.
Okay, if someone is making a case for inherent racism between white European people, it's a very difficult argument because you're telling me a bunch of
against people who are ethnically
you're
white
making
European.
a case that white people are being racist against white people. The European Union is not a government of black Africans. They're a government of white Europeans. So you're telling me to believe that white Europeans are racist against white people.
Do you think that that's impossible?
I don't think every country in Europe can be a bunch of white people who are intolerant of white people. That's a pretty big standard.
No, I'm saying that the political leadership of Europe is intolerant of white people.
Those people are white, though.
Yeah, so?
If you're making a case to me that a government full of white people is intolerant of a black minority, it's a lot more plausible than a government full of white people looking at other white people going, I hate that whitey. I don't like you, whitey.
I think that the thing is, see, the political situation has become so topsy-turvy that now, you have people, white people, decrying their own self-conception. I've seen videos, and you have too, of white people decrying other white people for the fact of being white. That famous meme of that guy in that college campus, and you say, well, you're white, and he's
but Merkel,
a white guy.
They applied to Germany, for example. Merkel is not a staunch leftist, multicultural reactionary. She's a Christian Democrat. The same thing with, again, if they apply to Britain, it's Theresa May is the most powerful person in that apparatus. So I'm not really sure how Theresa May is anti-white. I just don't see it substantiated. She's not even a leftist. She's not even a multiculturalist. She's the most conservative party in Britain.
Well, perhaps not a specific leader, but it does seem to be the culture of the European Union is sort of like, they are not allowing these Afrikaners in. And you've always believed, I don't actually know this, but the left, people on the left have always stated that there can be such a thing as inherent racism that is
between antagonistic groups. Between antagonistic groups, you never see the left talking about black people being racist to black people. That's not usually the argument. The argument is antagonistic groups can experience implicit forms of racism, but I don't think it's fair. Here's again, let me reinforce my point. I don't think it's fair that South Africans get turned away. I do believe that they should be accepted into these programs because obviously they're in an extreme crisis situation. I mean, there's no water in Johannesburg, so yes, we should accept and treat white refugees as fairly as we treat any other group. I don't think they should be excluded, and I denounce any kind of position that someone would take to leave people in this desperate situation.
Yes, but I have to say something about the blacks being racist against whites being racist against whites, because now we are dealing with the differences within these ethnic groups. Whites have these desperate need to make a world a better place. They are very prone to guilt. They have a very high sense of responsibility. So, of course, they are more critical of their own group too. You don't see that same in East Asia. You don't see that same in Southern America. You don't see that same in Africa, because it's not in the nature of those people to be like that. It's a white quality to be very, very self-critical. You don't see black governments being worried about, okay, are we now being racist against minorities? Are we now being homophobic? No, they are not being like that, because it's not in their nature to be like that. And that's why it's also not in their culture to be like that, because the culture, of course, is the result of their nature.
Okay, but here, let me just interject very quickly that there are plenty of genocides in Africa being perpetrated by different ethnic groups that are racially the same. Particularly in Rwanda, that was a genocide committed by people who were racially the same but ethnically different. In Asia, you have massive amounts of discrimination in Japan against Chinese people. Those are people who are racially the same but ethnically different. And I just don't see evidence for the fact that in this specific circumstance of the South African refugees that the European Union is targeting them because they feel somehow that white people are less deserving of compassion.
I wouldn't say it's the European Union per se. It's mainly the ideology of multiculturalism that makes these people blind to the sufferings of white people. For example, over here in Finland, when the Southern African government or parliament was deciding about the entire land confiscation thing, there was no news about it. It took 3 weeks for the Finnish public broadcasting to make a single article about the issue. And even then, it was very short, and they tried to stay away from all the controversy. The farm murders haven't been covered in the mainstream media over here at all. But at the same time, we see constant flood of news about the gassing victims in Syria, whether real or not, how terrible life is in Iraq, or how life is for the Syrian refugees, how life is in Tunisia, how life is in Somalia, how terrible it is for the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. But for some reason, when there are white people suffering, nothing is being said about it. And I don't think there needs to be a major conspiracy for that to happen. It only needs a lot of journalists who all share the same ideology. As one of our leftist journalists over here in Finland said, it's not that we choose all the journalists in our newspaper to have the same ideology. We just happen to have the same ideology. And he said that with all seriousness. So that's how it comes to be, this bias, that when there are enough people who are chosen in these positions with the same ideology, this sort of bias tends to occur.
Sorry to cut in.
Sorry, go ahead, Coach.
Sorry to cut in. I just have to do the super chats that I've been remiss. For Posterity sent me $10 Canadian. Thank you very much, For Posterity. He says, minorities can overtake natives through high birth rates, intermarriage, and continued migrant streams. Africa has high birth rate. Europeans may lose homelands and be extreme minority. It's insane. I happen to agree. Eric Kim sent 5,000 of something. I don't know what it is. It's a W with 2 horizontal lines. Is that won? I assume it's a Korean won, but 5,000 anything is like a lot. So thanks, Eric. He says, Merkel was the one who pushed multiculturalism into Germany and only abandoned it because of political inconvenience. Stop your cucking, Shaboskoy. So that about Merkel like cucking out, I don't know. But what do you guys think? We've been talking a little bit about the situation. We've gone on for about 90 minutes now, and I want to wind it down. But the thing I want to tie back to is the Enoch Powell speech, "The Rivers of Blood." That we've all agreed, we seem to agree that Enoch Powell was essentially correct in his diagnosis of what would happen, and that the language he used at the time was fairly inflammatory, language that's just still very inflammatory. But Bronx, you didn't bring up any kind of specific objection to anything that he said insofar as the prescience of his speech. Do you think that he was wrong in apart from the timing? Do you think that he was wrong as to what would happen demographically speaking?
It really depends on what you feel the substance of his speech was. If again, and he used the metaphors, but the sentiment of his metaphors, let's divorce it from the vulgarity, right, or the sort of the extent to which it's exaggerated, is that native Britons would no longer be the dominant paradigm, that native Britons would be under the oppressor, under a brown oppressor. And I just don't think that the roles have reversed, even in the most benign terms. I just don't think that the roles culturally in Britain have reversed in the meantime, and I don't think there's a really great argument for the fact that at this time that immigration will outpace integration, which are two competing forces in any society that involves more than one ethnic group. So that's my diagnosis of it. I think that it's very plausible at this point that integration is going to outpace immigration.
Okay. A couple of super chats came in. It said for posterity, said $2. Thanks for posterity. So what if Europeans are wiped out through this immigration? And that's a very valid point. What happens if Europe is wiped out? Europeans, native Europeans. Is that something that we should want?
Exactly, because we can talk about colonialism or whatever caused this, but we cannot run away from the consequences. The consequence will be the same anyway, and some past mistakes shouldn't be a death sentence for us all.
No, Tina, I agree. I look, again, I don't believe that native populations, again, because obviously, I'm Puerto Rican on my father's side, and the indigenous people of that country were exterminated over a long period of time under colonialism. So I don't endorse the systematic extermination of the indigenous people on these lands. If, for example, there were legal policy that white people, Britons, Finnish people, French people could not legally marry and reproduce with someone of the same race, then I would understand the alarm. If there were legal policy that women, native white women in these countries had to carry rape babies by Muslim migrants to term, I would understand the alarm. But at this point,
wait a second. What about the rape gangs that are going on in Europe, in the UK? It is estimated, conservatively estimated, that 1 million girls in the UK were abused by organized sex gangs.
Were these girls forced to bear pregnancies to term of mixed race babies?
I don't know that. I'm sure in some cases, yes. I mean, 1 million. You probably have it's such a big bag that it probably has everything in it. Okay, so think about the number: 1 million girls, and these are girls, underage girls. Okay, and
okay, but we're talking
so many places. And so you say that, you think that integration is outpacing immigration, but we're having worse and worse problems. The London overtook New York as the murder capital of the world. All right, and what is the problem there? You have an uncontrolled migration that is growing the city with a population that is not being assimilated and not even close to being assimilated.
Okay, but I'm answering what the super chat. The super chat presented an idea that native populations are going to be bred out,
right?
And I don't see that unless there is some kind of you have to go all the way with something like that. You have to carry mixed pregnancies involuntarily to term systematically to breed. There have been colonial forces that have bred native people out systematically. It happened in Australia.
Okay,
it happened.
Okay, so let's go specifically to the super chat question. So Europeans, it's okay for them to be wiped out?
No, that's not my point. My point is that currently I don't see evidence that there are two ways this could go. If ISIS physically, as a military force, comes into Europe and exterminates white Europeans, I don't see evidence that that's impending in any way, and I don't endorse that happening. Number two, if some kind of legislation is put into place that does not allow people of the same race, for example, white Britons, to breed together, and number two, the other part of that would have to be that if a white woman is a victim of migrant rape, she is forced by the government to bear mixed race children into the population. If those two things are not in place, the rest of the race mixing that changes the population over time is voluntary, and I don't see that as extermination.
No, that's not good. I have to say that's not the case because, for example, we do have laws that prohibit racial discrimination and in a way force people to deal with one another in a way that is different from the natural way these people would act. And then, of course, we have the media, which is very multiculturalist, which is normalizing things that weren't normal 50 years ago. Like if you go to Estonia, there a white Estonian woman who is in a relationship with an African migrant is laughed at. Like other Estonian women laugh at her and think she's somehow sort of a low-grade woman. But if you are here in Finland, you get praise from in these leftist circles for going out with an Iraqi asylum seeker. So yes, there is a cultural difference, and there are laws that make it more difficult for people to live in their natural way. And of course, there are these city-level decisions that are aimed at desegregating people. That, for example, in Finnish cities, there is a big problem with these immigrant populations acting like normal people do and living with their own kind. That's how people like to live, with people like them. And cities, of course, find that a problem because it leads to ghettos. And then they try to forcefully desegregate these people and sprinkle these migrants around different neighborhoods. So they have to use active policies to desegregate people because it's not natural for people to live like that. Usually people like to stick to their own kind. So yes, we are having laws and we are having a culture that is pushing this multiculturalist agenda on people.
Yeah, hang on. Let me just, good point, Tina, but let me just do the super chats. Serene Flight says, I don't know how to pronounce this. I suspect it's in Finnish. Torilla Tavatan.
Yes, that is a Finnish phrase. It means meet you at the square. It's a phrase said when, for example, Finland is mentioned in the international media or something, that let's celebrate, let's meet at the square.
Okay, thank you very much, Serene Flight. For posterity says, should lands not be for their respective peoples? That's a very good question. We're going to get to in just a second. Eric Kim for 2001 says Bronx Blogger is being a Shabbos Goy, Merkel too. For posterity, $2 Canadian. Thank you for posterity saying, I consider it the same as extermination. Okay, but the question I'm interested in here of the super chat questions is, should lands not be for their respective peoples? Bronx, I'll throw it to you. Shouldn't the land be for the respective people?
Okay, let me just put one little last point onto the thought that I had there, because
sure,
Tina contributed to it. I'm a product of a mixed race relationship, and I don't understand. Are you endorsing racial segregation,
Tina?
Me? And I'm in favor of voluntary segregation. So allowing people to live in the way they naturally live without these law enforcements that are anti-discrimination, without these zoning decisions that try to sprinkle different ethnicities among each other against their own will. I want people to be able to live as they want with the people they want to live with.
Okay, but if you know, if you, it's a legal thing, right? So if you endorse desegregation as a legal method, the only way to correct for what you want is to implement segregation in a legal sense. So, I mean, do you think that people, you were talking about voluntary, so you believe that people, number one, should be allowed to live together of opposite races? Do you believe that people should be able to date other races and have children voluntarily and form families if that's what they want?
Yes, of course, I believe they should be able to do all those things if they want to do that. But the thing is, usually people don't want to do that. And it's only with a lot of policy making and brainwashing that creates, for example, a couple of a white Finnish woman and a Somali Muslim man. It takes a lot of active decision making to even make that coupling possible.
Okay, so that, I mean, that's not an objective. That's an essentialist statement. The idea that people are born genetically predisposed to not want a race mix. That's built on a very dubious claim. I mean, you can state your own personal preference if you personally don't prefer it, or for whatever reason there's some kind of cultural tradition against it. But I don't know if it's substantiated that people are born with some kind of imperative not to mix race.
Well, where do they mix? I remember you mentioning, for example, the tribal warfare in Africa. And the tribal differences are much smaller than the differences between, say, Finns and sub-Saharan Africans. And still, those people don't want to live among each other. For example, the Hutu and the Tutsi in Rwanda. They don't want to live with each other. They see a difference between the two groups. So isn't it a bit unrealistic to expect that Finns and Somalis wouldn't see the difference between these two groups and want to stick with their own kind?
Yeah, there's a final final question here, because we're going to wind down the conversation. I don't want it to get too long. The last question is, Canada and the US can be multi-ethnic mixed race, mixed ethnicity. But Germany, for example, is the homeland of the Germans. Why should ethnicities not be preserved? I take it that this question is for Bronx Blogger.
I think that people should do what they want. And if you personally want to have white children with a white person, more power to you. Congratulations. I don't think anyone...
That's not the question. The question is, shouldn't like specific areas be the purview of specific demographics, like what's happening in Japan, what's happening in Korea, what's happening in Israel, where you have specific latching onto that specific piece of land and not letting it go? Shouldn't that be the norm?
You would have to create a situation where certain groups of people cannot live in certain places. And we had that in the United States of America. It was called Jim Crow. And it said that black people cannot live here because white people live here, and this land is being preserved for the white race. So I have seen historically that has not worked out.
Yeah, apartheid was actually a better example, because apartheid was Jim Crow is sort of like, you know, shadow law, but apartheid was right out in the open. But also the motivation for apartheid was that the separation of the different races, because ultimately there was the belief that the races could not get along together. And
apartheid wasn't for the preservation of the indigenous people of Africa. Apartheid was to privilege European migrants. So apartheid is the inverse of the argument that's being made here.
Actually, in South Africa, the whites got there first. They were there long before the black population arrived.
They were on the continent of Africa before black people?
No, not on the continent of Africa. In South Africa, but
they don't come from that land. They traveled there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody travels to whatever land and ultimately arrive. But the black population in South Africa, from what I understand, I could be wrong, but the black population, the Zulu tribes, came from the north of South Africa, and they wiped out the Hottentots, who had been the indigenous population in South Africa. I could be wrong.
Okay, but you're asking me if I support ethno-states. I don't support ethno-states because they again, I have a moral problem with ethno-states, but I just don't think that they don't function. They don't function because
Just
eventually you have to.
like Japan.
Japan's economy is collapsing because they don't have enough population to take care of all these old Japanese people who are surely pure, but don't have anyone to take care of them.
To call it collapsing, that's way off the mark. It's not growing as fast as other economies, but to call it collapsing, that would be
but their population rates are collapsing, and their reproduction, they don't have babies.
No, you said before that their economy was collapsing, but that's not the case.
Okay, but it's a capitalist economy. You cannot have a capitalist economy that succeeds for very long without new customers, and babies are new customers, new consumers.
Well, they can export it too, like which is the model that they're pursuing. But be that as it may, the Japanese economy is not collapsing. It's sort of like stagnating, one could say. But when you contrast that with its declining population, and it is true that the Japanese population is declining, it's actually doing pretty good, right? So
they are not currently an ethno-state because it is legal for people to mix races in Japan. It is legal for people to mix races in Israel. So at the moment, we do not have any existing ethno-states. And the times that people have attempted to create
actually, in Israel, and I do have to point out that in Israel, I do believe it. Somebody who might be more knowledgeable, but I think in Israel only Jewish marriages between Jewish people are legally sanctioned in Israel, and that's one of the problems with a lot of Palestinians, that in order to get married they actually have to leave Israel because they can't get married there. But that's for another conversation. The thing I'm trying to say is, see, you say that ethnostates don't work, and I'm giving you proof positive that they do work, like South Korea. South Korea is an ethnostate.
South Korea is not an ethnostate. You, in order for an ethnostate to exist, you have to not allow people to marry outside of their race, and there are South Koreans who are married outside of their race. It has to be illegal.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Okay, rather than call it an ethno race, a ethnically homogenous country. Okay. For the most part, okay.
But that occurs generally in an organic sense. There's an ebb and flow to it. I don't see a country
decided that they weren't going to allow foreign people to migrate in mass, right?
Yeah, but that's a nationality thing. That's not an ethnicity thing. That's a foreign policy thing. If we're talking about ethnic groups, preservation of ethnic groups by law, that has always resulted in a lot of really destructive outcomes. If people choose, if people choose to breed with their own race, I don't have a problem with that. And I think that I think that people can tolerate and coexist in societies with people who want to breed with their own race and people who don't want to breed with their own race. But I don't think that there's any need for special preservation of ethnic groups that are not under some kind of, like Native Americans maybe have a case, but those people were systematically slaughtered. Unless a person,
Let me ask one question. Do you think Native Americans should have closed the borders? This is a bit. Yeah.
Well, but it's important. This argument is important, right? Which is to say that you have invaders, physical invaders under a flag and a state with a military invading a country and exterminating the native population. That is not the state of Western Europe. You do not have ISIS showing up with a military under a state flag and engaging in sustained military campaign against white Europeans. I would completely disavow that because that's very wrong. But I endorse everybody's right to breed with who they want to. I think we agree with that. People should be able to breed, with their own race if they want or if they don't want to.
But to use your own argument, most of the immigrants to America most likely didn't have any evil intentions. They went a part of an army. They went there to conquer. They were there just to create a life.
No, but those are later immigrants. I'm talking about the people that exterminated the native population of this country was exterminated by British. Originally Spaniard.
The farmers.
No, Irish farmers didn't systematically execute Native Americans. Those people were killed by the Spaniards, the British, and then the American government by law. They were systematically exterminated by the military.
So it's basically like the immigrants and the ISIS, that there are the peaceful ones who only come to live here, but then there are also the militant ones with political agenda.
Are those people? I don't understand. Are they coming there on a military campaign to exterminate Finnish people?
Yeah, I would say that if Antem Chowdhury comes to Helsinki, as he has done, and says that the Islamic flag shall wave above the parliament building in Helsinki, yes, I would say that it sounds a bit threatening to our democratic Western system.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's not a military campaign. There's no state. There's no soldiers. It's just terrorism at this point. It's
You
a
don't need
series of.
weapons when you have the womb. When you can outbreed the people and abuse their kindness, which is unfortunately what is happening. There are people who really need help, but then there are a whole lot of those who are abusing our kindness.
So, I mean, would you put limits on how many children people who are accepted under asylum can have?
No, I would put limits on how many asylum seekers we would take.
Okay, but that's just civic nationalism. You could that has nothing to do with ethno nationalism at all. It's just
hang on. Eric Kim, who's sends a super chat. Thanks, Eric. He says, "I live in South Korea, and we understand that we are a pure ethnicity and an ethno state. We simply don't discriminate against mixed because we don't need to yet." His words.
Okay, but that still is it's still not illegal to produce a mixed race baby in a country. Then it's still not an ethnicity. You can be a racial chauvinist, which is what this person is talking about. This person is a racial chauvinist, and maybe racial chauvinism or ethnic chauvinism is mainstream in South Korea. Fine, that's maybe that's mainstream. Fine, but it's not an ethno state.
Okay, I have to say in this that my idea is pretty different, but it may be cultural differences because in Finnish, when we talk about the ethno-state, kansallisvaltio, it means simply a country in which there is one ethnic group that has a hegemony over the country and its culture. So it doesn't mean that there must be laws that are there to protect the position of that people. For example, Finland is an ethno-state basically, and has been an ethno-state for a very long time without any laws protecting the native population because it has been isolated. But as I said, that might also be a cultural or a linguistic difference.
Okay, but let's say generationally. Okay, let's say 2 generations from now, someone's grandfather came to your country, and 2 generations later, this person is an integrated is a person who's integrated into your society that is culturally Finnish but not racially, ethnically Finnish. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that valid to you? Do you see that as a fully Finnish person? If they're not from the ethnic group that is directly linked to the land, if they've been there so long enough that they fit culturally.
Of course they are not Finnish. Being Finnish is an ethnicity. It means that you're born with it. It cannot change during time. And no amount of time spent in Somalia would make me a Somali. And just the same, no amount of time or generation spent here would turn a foreigner into a Finn. It's an ethnicity. But of course, a person can live in accordance with the Finnish laws, and a person can live in accordance with the Finnish culture, but no foreigner can ever become a Finn.
I mean, that's a fair distinction. I mean, I understand the distinction you're making. You have to remember also that I come from a country that is mechanically different than yours in terms of how ethnicity works, because none of us are from here per se. None of the mixed groups that live here are from here. But like I said, I endorse people's personal agency when it comes to breeding. I understand if people want to preserve their culture, because I come from a post-colonial culture. If you feel like you should be a cultural advocate for Finnish culture in Finland, I understand that. But my concern is when
you dropped out there, Bronx.
what's that?
You dropped out the last few seconds.
Oh, sorry. My concern is when law starts to be made around the idea that there are quotas, and if organically, not from an invading military force, not from imposition, but organically, at some point, if Finland is going to participate in global corporate capitalism, which I don't necessarily endorse, at some point there's so much freedom of movement under that system and part of the EU. And listen, if you wanted to leave the European Union, I don't like the European Union. They suck. I don't like their economic policy. I don't like their brutal austerity programs. I don't like any of that stuff. I would endorse you leading a campaign to leave the EU because I just don't agree with the way that they impose power on people. I believe that people should have control over their own destiny, and I'm not a big fan of bureaucracy. So I just want to put that out there. But I'm always very concerned when people have laws about we need to maintain certain quotas. I think that there's a natural ebb and flow to this stuff, and kind of the best path going forward for the goals that you're looking for is for the government itself to make bureaucratic changes to how they filter and vet migrants and asylum seekers to be more in line with what the people feel the program's purpose is.
Well, that's something I could agree about, that these problems should be solved at the borders, not inside the country, when the other problems or the side effects are already taking place. So that's something we can agree about. But I would say that there's nothing natural about for example, people from Afghanistan or sub-Saharan Africa arriving to Finland. If it was natural, it would have been happening for millennia, but it hasn't.
Oh, no! I don't. I'm sorry. I should have made myself clear. I don't mean the migration itself, but I mean if human beings are already around each other in a society, at some point people are going to mix genetically. That's going to happen. Migration is a crisis of systems. It's not about people necessarily. But you are surprisingly moderate for your position. You need to remember that the average person who uses this term ethno-nationalism, they mean a staunch deportation program. They mean a sort of a militarized immigration policy. So I have to commend you. You're surprisingly commendable within the political position that you stand for.
Well, about that, I must say that maybe you have the wrong idea about ethno-nationalists, because most of the ethno-nationalists I know, they are not for gassing or ovening anyone or forced deportations of masses of people. They simply want a homeland for us too, so that we can have our culture and live with our own people too. So they are pretty kind people.
It's a big, broad movement, and I think that country to country, different groups may use the same language and may represent different political positions in terms of how they want to achieve things. In America, we have our ethno-nationalists here, and they are talking about deportation of not only illegal immigrants, but also deportation of people who do not fit, like you said, the culturally hegemonic class. So it really is. It's a really broad movement, country to country. Everybody kind of seems to have a different opinion of what ethno-nationalism means in action.
Of course, it depends from country to country and from person to person. But what I have to take away from this discussion is that we see a lot of the same problems. And I think a lot of the things we both find the biggest issues could be fixed by focusing on those same problems. So maybe that's the common ground we found, that maybe we should stay out of other countries' businesses and enforce direct democracy, and things would be better for the both of us, even though we're on the opposite sides of the political scale.
Oh yeah, I would definitely endorse that. I definitely think that we both are, in a sense, very populist-minded people, and I think that countries and civilians would be much happier across the political spectrum if they had an.
Oh, Bronx dropped out. His Wi-Fi screwed up.
Okay.
Well, okay, we've been going on for close to 2 hours.
Yes.
So I was going to wrap it up now, and unfortunately, Bronx has dropped out. I hope he hops back on the call, and if not, I'm just going to go ahead and end the conversation because we've gone on 2 hours and it's been very interesting and very illuminating on a lot of grounds. Tina, I want to thank you very, very much because you and I had never had any interaction before, and it's been just lovely talking with you.
Yeah, it has been a very interesting discussion. As I mentioned before this live stream, I've had a very difficult time finding a Finnish leftist who would debate me on a live stream. So this has been a first for me.
Yeah.
Very sorry. I don't usually have this many technical difficulties. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. I was just wrapping up because as I said, we've been going on for 2 hours now, and
oh, great.
And so it's been a great conversation. But 2 hours is like the upper limit I have for streams because there are these monster streams of 5 hours, and it's like who gets through them, But anyway, it's been a delightful conversation, and
Tina, thank you very much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to learn more about Finnish culture and politics.
Yes, and as I mentioned on Twitter, I really can respect your decision to join this live stream and actually have some conversation with someone who doesn't agree with you, because I've noticed that it's not something all of anti-fascists believe in. So I really appreciate this.
Great.
Get a room, you two. So with that, I just want to thank both of my guests, lovely people, and I want to thank all of you who've been watching this live stream. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you next time.